It's 27 to 5 on 2CC Canberra Live, and it's Friday afternoon, which means that having just heard the 4:30 news update, it's time to welcome to the studio from Envision Financial, Luke Smith. Good afternoon.
Mate, how are we?
So far, so good. It's the end of a very long week. You know, some weeks it flies by like that, and you think, where did it go? Other weeks you think, geez, it's a long time since Monday.
Well, you know, I think with the way we're going at the moment, it's every other day's Friday, and you sort of blink and go, hang on, why am I hungry? It's 3:30 in the afternoon, so...
Well, there you go. Now, next Friday, I believe, is Good Friday, so we won't be having a program next Friday.
Right, we've got a week off.
We'll take that time off. Plus, I won't be here anyway next
well,
week.
you definitely have a week off.
Absolutely having the... So as of 6 o'clock tonight, I'm putting on the Hawaiian shirt.
I like it.
It's holiday time. But before we can do that, we have to get down to business here. And today we're talking about something about which I know absolutely nothing.
Right.
PSSAP Superannuation. Yep. What is it and how does it work? And so apparently PSSAP is not the same thing as PSS, which I find very confusing.
Yeah, look, and I think that's really why we're talking about it today, because in previous shows we've spoken about the defined benefit schemes that the government have, and depending on your age, you've either been in it forever and won't leave, or you were too young to join it and they closed it around 05 from memory. And this was a byproduct, or the fund that was created by the government to hold contributions to superannuation for people employed by the government who had joined the workforce and were unable to join the PSS defined benefit scheme. And it's been topical. I've had a number of people sort of shoot through an email, a couple of YouTube requests and the like to say, hey, can you touch on this? Because there are a very large portion of people in the ACT especially that will be in this by default. And there's a few misnomers, there's a few misconceptions, and this really, like anything else, is just about looking under the hood. And the purpose of this sort of show is to just get people thinking. And I find the worst thing that someone can do is make an assumption without finding out. So really all we're going to do today is cover off the fund in general terms, give some people some things to think about, and sort of compare it to other options or general super fund practices so that they can have a gauge as to whether things are appropriate for them or not.
Okay, so in general terms, the PSS is the old scheme and the PSSAP is the new and improved modern scheme.
Correct. So the key point of distinction here is the PSS is a defined benefit scheme where your entitlements are calculated using a specific formula, and it is impacted by your final average salary and your rate of contribution while you work there. The PSSAP is a standard accumulation fund. Just like any other superannuation fund in Australia, the value of your fund is impacted by the underlying investments in your risk profile and your rate of contribution and how much you put in. So the methodology from a calculation standpoint is very different. Some other key things to consider in relation to the PSSAP is it only has 4 investment options. You've got cash, income, aggressive, and balanced. Now, I liken this for the tradies out there. If a plumber comes to my house, I had a plumber at my house this morning installing a toilet, and if all he had was a monkey wrench and a Phillips head screwdriver, it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult to install a toilet. Super funds are just like any other facet of life. You want as much control and as much flexibility and as many tools as possible at your disposal, because some people have more interest in super than others. And I find that as you become a little bit older and you start to talk about the word retirement or pension and starting an income stream, knowing where your money's going to come from and having an understanding of what you've got becomes a little bit more important to you. The young Thundercats out there that are 30 years from getting it go, oh, whatever, who cares, I can't get it, let it ride. And that's cool. Super funds are really just about saying, is what I'm in right for me? And if not, what are my alternatives? So in relation to flexibility and control, I would say this fund is very, very limited in relation to your investment options. By comparison, an industry fund may offer you more options, or a personal super fund that could be provided by the likes of an MLC, a Macquarie, a Colonial, any of the big names that you could go and get a superannuation for, would allow you to select from 400 or 500 different managed funds, a very broad range of exchange traded funds, as well as probably the ASX 200 or 300 biggest companies. Now, for me, that's what I would sort of peg as a normal super fund. that would be appropriate for most people who have an interest in probably one of the greatest assets they're going to have in their lives. So flexibility is something that you need to consider. If you're not fussed, that's fine.
Okay.
You know, it's really just understanding what you need and what you can work with.
So, and I'm a complete layman here, but taking what I can from what you've just said, the PSSAP is a little bit more constricted and limited than you might find in a superannuation fund that other people might be invested in.
It's, from an investment standpoint, it's one of the most limited funds I've seen in a long time.
Okay. So if you're a public servant and that's what you're in, do you have a choice? Can you swap out to a different fund?
Yeah, look, very much so. A number of years back, there was some innuendo around, well, we get 15.4% paid into super. If you don't put it into PSSAP, we'll only pay you 9.5%. Most enterprise agreements now under the superannuation choice legislation don't care where you put it. And even if you do have an old school agreement that says that you have to do that, I'd keep the minimum amount in PSSAP. I'd have your increased superannuation contributions going into that fund, and then I'd be rolling over the balance of your account to a more flexible opportunity where you have an interest and a need and want to participate in the various offerings that another fund could give to you. So yeah, it's not that it has to be used, it's the default
So
option.
in those circumstances, you could actually run two accounts?
Yeah, very much so.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is always about, you know, having the right fund for you at your stage of life and your level of interest in the things that you want to do. Some people come in and say, look, I'd really like to buy some listed shares because I want to control the income that's paid from them, and I'd like to maximise my franking credits, because we saw at the last election, franking credits matter to the older members of the community, because when you retire, they have a huge role to play in your retirement and in the funding of your retirement. And this fund, for example, doesn't let you buy listed shares. So it's not that we're talking good or bad, it's just about making sure that you have the opportunities and the tools that you need to do the things that you want, and we don't have a lot of tools in our toolbox when it comes to PSSAP.
Yeah. Now, of course, the PSS is the old scheme and the PSSAP is the new scheme. If people are on the old scheme, can they change to the new scheme?
No.
Okay.
No,
so you're stuck with what you've got?
Yeah.
And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, being stuck, no one's ever going to say they're upset about being stuck in the PSS. Let's put it that way.
Because it was a good scheme?
Yes, and the calculations and the methodology of that scheme are ridiculous, which is fantastic for the members that are in there. But when that fund was created and the rules were written, people were earning much different levels of income.
Yeah.
And it is a very, very generous scheme with a lot of good options. But the downside of that fund, if you wanted to have one, is you can't choose your underlying investments. Yeah. So they do that for you, and that's fine because that's the nature of that fund. If I had to consider the PSSAP across the broader retail market, and I'll even lump industry funds in there, when an industry fund's more flexible than what you've got, you know you've got to question the opportunities that you can take advantage of within this fund. The other thing people need to keep in mind is they come in, they say, oh, I'm in that fund, it's a good fund, it's cost effective. Now, to paint that picture for people, when we look at a superannuation fund, and we've said in previous shows, there could be an admin fee that they charge. And generally speaking, where you have a lot of investment opportunities, you would pay an admin fee that is dependent on the value of your fund, or it could be capped out at a certain price. When we look at the internal cost ratio, which is a mouthful on a Friday afternoon, but it's basically just the cost of the option that you're in.
That's one of your favourite phrases though, isn't it? Internal cost ratio?
Well, it's one of the most misunderstood or misconstrued or poorly understood things in our industry, because a lot of people go, I don't have an admin fee, my fund's really cheap, and then they find out that, you know, they're in PSSAP in the balanced option paying 1.15% plus a property cost plus the borrowing cost, which could see you up around 1.35%. Now, again, for some perspective, a diversified portfolio that's run in just about any super fund, for me, should cost between 0.4 and 0.6, maybe 0.7, depending on some of the underlying investments. If you're in a fund that has 4 options, one of them's cash, the other one is aggressive, which means you're running 96% growth assets, which isn't going to be applicable for a very large portion of the population. You've really only got a balanced option that you can use, and you're paying 1.15% for the privilege of what they invest in, when you could go to just about anywhere else and structure a portfolio that's right for you and take advantage of all of these other opportunities like listed shares, exchange traded funds, listed investment companies, specialised managed funds and a raft of other stuff, and it costs across a portfolio 0.4, 0.5, 0.6. If you think about someone having $1 million in this fund, that's a big number. And that's a number that you could be saving every year that you are a member of that fund. So it's just about making people aware of the costs and then also how aggressive something is. In another show we spoke about, well, what does balance mean? And I said, I said that week that after 20 years, I don't know what balance means anymore. And this is a good example. The balanced option at PSSAP runs 78% growth assets.
Right. It's not entirely balanced then, is it?
Well, if it depends what you call balanced, right? So for me, a balanced portfolio has 50% defensive and 50% growth. Yeah. I don't have a balanced portfolio in our business that runs those sorts of allocations because that's not what the balance label means to me.
No.
And again, when we're comparing things, two ways that people look at a fund without understanding all of the other terminology under the hood. What does it cost and what does it do? And when you're comparing costs, as we said in a previous show, if I've got a car driving at 140 kilometres an hour and it's a blue Datsun, and I've got a red Datsun and it's driving at 100 kilometres an hour, there's no way the car doing 100 can beat the car doing 140 k's. So,
unless you switch on the nitrous.
well, unless you've got plenty of boost.
See, I like your analogies. You know, we've got the red car, the blue car, and we had superannuation is like installing a toilet with a shifting wrench and a Phillips head screwdriver. Yeah. I can dig where you're coming from.
Well, look, you've just got to put it in a language that people can understand, right? Because this can be a fairly confronting topic and people can get bamboozled in the terminology. So if they can picture the car doing 140 and 100, it's not about the balanced option. Yes. It's not about the car. We should be talking about how fast the car is going, not the make of the car. And by the make of the car, I mean the label of your risk profile.
Right.
So, the aggressive option in PSSAP, it runs 67% equities in their PDS and a 94% growth profile in total.
Wow.
So that is really like doing 180 in a 100 zone.
Yes.
If COVID comes along and half of your super's gone and you get pulled over going down Gungahlin Drive doing 180, not only would you be keeping up with traffic, on the way to work at the moment because it's like a racetrack, but you can't complain about getting a ticket. The important thing for people is that they understand that this is going on, because the one thing I found through COVID was people got upset because they thought they were in a more defensive option than they really were, and the value of their super moved more than they were comfortable with, and that's upset people because the labelling of investment options is a little misleading and not consistent across the board.
Certainly very misleading when balanced means 80% or 90% growth.
In some options, exactly.
Very quickly, are there other things that people should consider in relation to the PSSAP fund?
Yeah, I'd also consider the insurance. So the insurance definitions in there, again, don't make the assumption that because it's cheap, it's great. I've never seen anything in life be the cheapest out there and give you all the bells and whistles. And if there's one thing that people have learned during COVID is your income underpins your entire existence and everything you plan on doing both now and in the future. It is your greatest asset in most instances and should be protected with the best possible contract. And if you take the PSSAP, again, I've got nothing against PSSAP, but I get really frustrated when people come in thinking it's good without understanding what they could compare it to. So if you've got income protection through the PSSAP, I would be looking at another alternative, because there are a number of good contracts out there that will provide you with a huge range of additional ways to be paid. And I'm yet to meet anybody that's upset about getting paid on something. Then the traditional misconception that, insurance companies don't pay, it's a horrible experience. You want as many tools in your toolbox on the claim side, just like you do when it comes to investments. The more you can use and the more choice and flexibility you have, the greater degree of control and comfort and peace of mind you can have whilst accumulating assets and also leading into retirement.
For a moment there, I thought you were going to say you want to have as many tools in your toolbox as you would if you were installing a toilet.
I don't have that many toilets.
What'd you do? Did you break it?
No, I had it replaced. Yeah.
It's about 12 minutes to 5 on 2CC. I'm with Luke Smith from Envision Financial. This afternoon we're talking about PSSAP Superannuation. What is it and how does it work? The short answer to that is, well, it's to do with the public service, but beyond that, I'll tell you what, I'm a little bit mystified. But that's why Luke's here, to explain all of the details. Back with more in just a moment. It's about 7 minutes to 5 on 2CC Canberra Live, and this afternoon I've got Luke Smith from Envision Financial in the studio with me today. We're talking about PSSAP Superannuation, what it is and how does it work. We've determined that it's not the same thing as PSS, and we've covered a bit of other ground too. So Luke, what are the key things that people need to consider when they're in the PSSAP?
Yeah, so taking into account what we said before the ad break in relation to the risk profile, you want to make sure that you understand the asset allocation or the total risk that you're taking on for your selected profile, because 94% of growth assets in a portfolio is extremely aggressive, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as you know that.
Exactly.
So check out your option that you've picked and consider if it's right for you. Look at your internal cost ratios. See what's in your fund. Multiply your fund value by your internal cost ratio, and then consider an alternative if you were to incur costs of 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, and do the math, because there may be options to save a lot of money, and you're going to be in this potentially for 10, 15, 20 years. If you can save a couple of $1,000 a year on what you've got, that's something people should be considering, because nothing more frustrating for me when they come in and find that out at 62 and wish someone had told them sooner. So check out your internal cost ratios. If you want to buy ETFs, exchange traded funds, listed shares, and all sorts of other things, then you're going to need to consider another fund. Check your enterprise agreement to make sure that you can have 15.4% paid to another fund. In most instances, that would be the case. If you can't for any reason, keep the minimum in PSSAP and then roll the balance over to somewhere else if you want a little more control and flexibility and to potentially lower your costs. And consider the insurance that you have in the fund. If you want an open comparison done to a range of other providers to make sure that you have the best possible contract for the right amount of money, that's something that I think is very important, because you should be checking your default waiting period and your default benefit period. In some instances, the benefit period may be 2 years or 5 years. Most people need a benefit period through to age 65 because they intend to work through probably at least age 60 anyway. So if you're going to pay for something in a fund, that's great, but understand what you've got and make sure that you've got the best possible definitions and inclusions. And if that means that you cancel cover there after you've taken out new cover in your own name to maximise the tax efficiency of it, and we touched on some of that in the insurance series that we did last month, just understand what you've got. I don't mind if you want to stay there and pay amazing investment cost ratios because you like the fund. That's great, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's nothing more frustrating for me when people come in, don't understand that and wish someone had told them sooner. And that's really all we've tried to do today. A lot of hype is given to CSS and PSS, but PSSAP seems to sort of slide under the radar, and we just wanted to bring a few things to people's attention and make sure that whether you're living in Terrigal, you're living in Cronulla, and we'll give a big shout out to Heath and the team he's got over there in the Solomon Islands, who are evidently avid listeners now because there's not a lot to do in the Solomon Islands. They're all thinking about these sorts of things because the police especially, this is an example of where a government department will end up in the PSSAP scheme. So just be aware of what you've got, use the tools that are available to you, and consider options, and just don't assume that it's the best thing since sliced bread.
So all those people not in the public service and who were, concerned that perhaps they're somehow getting left behind because they don't have 15% going into their super, it's not all the gravy that you might have thought it was. There are limitations to the public service.
Yeah, look, there's good and bad with everything. There's a good argument for PSS. There's a bad argument for PSS. It just depends if it's appropriate for you. So it's just about making sure that you understand what you're working with, because you could be in this fund for 25 years, and I'd hate to be in something for 25 years and find out that potentially there was a cheaper option with more viability and more flexibility and more control, and nobody told me about it. That frustrates me when people come in and talk about these sorts of things financially in any area, not just this. So
Indeed.
just information's key.
So Luke, where can listeners get more information?
Yeah, so 62604749. Taking appointments for July at the moment. So if you want to come in and have a bit of a chat, there's going to be a bit of a wait, but unfortunately there's only so many hours in the day. Envisionfinancial.com.au, we've got the Knowledge Centre there. You can subscribe to that for free, and there's a huge pool of resources, calculators and videos you can watch on a range of different topics. We've got the podcast, The Strategy Stacker, Luke Talks Money on iTunes and Spotify. And we've got the YouTube channel, Envision Financial Canberra, where we record the show, and you can have the key takeouts before and after the break and watch it on the phone, and you don't have to read too much. So I find that's becoming a bit of a favourite.
Absolutely. Luke, thanks very much.
Pleasure.
We'll catch you again in 2 weeks'
See you in a
time
few
after
weeks.
Easter.
Done deal.
Luke Smith from Envision Financial on 2CC. It's about 2 minutes to 5. News coming up next.